So the third world is crumbling very rapidly. And because the Western society is not strong enough to maintain stability in the third world, this destruction of the third world is picking up pace very rapidly right now. You look at Latin America, you look at Africa, there are coups happening in Africa regularly now. The Latin American countries are becoming woke very rapidly, and that will also lead to a lot of social violence. And now you have this new thing that is starting to happen in Israel. The only exception that I see is East Asia, which is actually very, very stable, Andy. And I have been to virtually all East Asian countries in the last 2 months.
Jayant, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Andy. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much. Let's just jump right into it. I was doing some listening about your work and some interviews that you had. And one thing that really stood out to me was that this was an interview that you did a couple of months ago, is everything is chaotic, if you would. And it certainly seems the case as an investor, not only as an investor, but as a just a human being. More chaos. I am 50 years old now, more chaos than I can remember. I wanted to ask you really, what is your idea? Where's that coming from in the sense of like where we're at in history? Yeah, what are the influences that are making things chaotic?
Well, I mean, very fundamentally in the Western world, we have elected idiots into positions of power.
Right.
And that is leading to a whole to a destruction of the society, and we are on a path to self-destruction in the Western society today. Within the last 1 month, there have been massive protests by Sikh in Canada. There have been massive riots by Eritreans in Canada. And from yesterday, there have been protests by Palestinians in Canada. Now, none of these things happened in Canada. Now, we can have our views on whether those people have legitimate claims or not. But why did Canada destroy itself? Why did it import problems of other countries within its shores? One of the best, most peaceful countries in the world is no longer peaceful. So we have elected idiots in positions of power, and that has meant that our social system is crumbling. Because when you don't have leaders in place, everything below them starts to degenerate and decay, and that's what we see in the Western world. Now, in the third world countries, a decay has been even faster, because they were solely dependent on institutions provided by the Western society. Those institutions have been hollowed out very rapidly in the last 50 to 70 years, because Western people no longer manage those institutions. So the third world is crumbling very rapidly. And because the Western society is not strong enough to maintain stability in the third world, this destruction of the third world is picking up pace very rapidly right now. You look at Latin America, you look at Africa, there are coups happening in Africa regularly now. The Latin American countries are becoming woke very rapidly, and that will also lead to a lot of social violence. And now you have this new thing that is starting to happen in Israel. The only exception that I see is East Asia, which is actually very, very stable, Andy. And I have been to virtually all East Asian countries in the last 2 months. I love them. There is social stability. There's fire in people. People want to do better their lives, and they want to improve their societies. And so this is where I see the world divided into 3 parts. Let me just complete this by saying that East Asia copied Western values. They copied the Western ways of institutions and living. and they have maintained those institutions, whereas the West has decided to give away those institutions. So that's how I look at the overall picture of the world today.
Got it. So if I could ask you, what would you define as East Asia, like Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand?
Yeah, I think I have to be careful in using my term East Asia, because I exclude Philippines from it. But let me list those names. That's Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and China. These are, for me, East Asian countries that are on a path to progress and a path to improvement. And I see continual stability in these societies and continual improvements in these societies over the next many, many years. Now, Vietnam is improving rapidly. I don't think it will become China, though. Vietnam has its own issues. Cambodia has its own issues. But Malaysia is all right. Malaysia will get stuck as a second world country. It has no hope of becoming a first world country. Because firstly, the institutions are not driven by meritocracy in Malaysia. In Malaysia, they have a concept called Bhumiputra, which gives preferences to Malays over Chinese and Indian citizens. Now, that is horrible for any society. Any society that is not meritocratic destroys itself. East Asia is fundamentally meritocratic. You look at China, you look at Japan, you look at Singapore, they are extraordinarily meritocratic, whereas West was very meritocratic. And over the last 50 years or so, it has given away meritocracy as the backbone of the institutions. So these are my key East Asian countries. Malaysia is a second world country. I don't consider it as a part of the key East Asian countries, also because Malaysia has the Islamic issue. Malaysia and Indonesia has Islamic issues. There are always possibilities of fanaticism emerging in both of those countries. So I exclude them because they are not so stable. Philippines has similar problems. They have in the southern part of Philippines, in Mindanao, they have insurgency, they have social conflicts in the rest of the country. So Philippines is also a country that I exclude from my East Asia.
Got it. So you mentioned that they are, or they've mirrored, or they copied, if you would, Western values, I guess, for lack of a better word. And now their society, their culture, their society, and then thus business is thriving. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That's what you're saying. Where does demographics come into play, if you would? So, for example, China, from what I understand, they overstated their birth rates over the last several decades. Japan, you mentioned Japan being a winner in this, if you would, but their birth rates are still relatively low. So how does population and demographics help determine this, or does it even have a role in this?
So when I said that these countries are improving, they are improving not just business-wise. There's harmony in these societies. There's passion in these society. People in these societies are fired up to improve their lives and improve the lives of their children. Mm-hmm. And there's a tendency to think more socially. Now, that is, of course, a lot of these values are Western. Most of these values are Western values, and a lot of these values stay in the Western society as well. But what you have in East Asia is a lack of social conflicts. You hardly ever hear about ethnic conflicts happening in East Asia, the kind that I just mentioned about what's happening in Canada now. Something that Canada should never have imported. Or the US. And, Canada is just an example because I grew up, I have lived a long time in Canada. I'm more aware of what's happening in Canada. And I have recently published a paper on the self-destructive path that Canada is on. So I have all the numbers in my mind. So that's why I mentioned Canada. But the whole of the Western society across the board is on the same path to self-destruction because they have diluted their native populations by about 100% in the last 2 generations. So now coming back to East Asia, yes, there is a demographic issues. There's a problem with fertility rate in East Asia. Fertility rate of East Asia is low, but fertility of native women, and why native women in the Western society, which if I want to think about fertility of women who have been there for 3 generations in the Western world, is probably very, very similar to what you see in China and Japan today. Now, yes, population in Canada and the US are improving, but how does it benefit you by importing a whole trainload of people who are welfare recipients and protesters and who don't like the Western society and who create problems in the Western society? So yes, demographically, it seems that the Western society is in a better shape. But how does it matter? Because those are not contributors in economic terms, and they are creating social problems in the Western society. Moreover, now because they are already here, you have to pay their welfare costs, pension costs when they grow up, and you need to bring in even more number of immigrants to the Western society to make up for the pension requirements of these people. So the falling fertility rate is a problem across the world in the developed world. And we have to address it the way it exists. You cannot kick the can down the road by importing immigrants, and that is what the Western society has done. Now, look at Japan. Yes, GDP of Japan has been stagnant, which is what international media tells you about. What international media fails to tell you about, Andy, is that GDP per capita based on working person in Japan has actually been outpacing the United States for the last several decades. So overall productivity of a Japanese worker and his economic output has actually improved faster than it has happened in the USA. So you want to ignore, you want to look at the partial truth and bend it according to your own purposes. And that's what has been ingrained in the minds of most people when they think about falling fertility rate in the East Asian societies. But that's actually a problem across the board. And Japan, from what I have seen, and I've been to Japan a couple of times in the last few months, you go to villages and villages are disappearing. Old people are dying out. Young people no longer want to live in villages. And I actually want to live in one of those villages one of these days because it's such a beautiful place, such a calm, peaceful, harmonious place. So, fertility could be a problem. But is it a problem? First, we have to decide on it because Japan doesn't seem to be suffering as much as the international media is making it out to be. And this, on per capita basis. Now, GDP is not something I worry about because per capita is what matters. What happens to you and me is what matters. So from my perspective, Japan is perfectly fine. And by not importing a whole bunch of immigrants, they have avoided social problems. And they have created every reason to think about the low fertility rate now rather than kicking the can down the road.
Got it. Okay, so if I can, let me work that out into China, which I thought was interesting because it's all over the news now. And what I mean now, well, let me take a step back. Going throughout my career, the narrative was the growth in China and how China was going to dominate the next century or whatever. And it certainly seemed to be on track for that. Then just recently, I would even say in the last 6 to 12 months, it's a different kind of a narrative where China is actually, if you would, collapsing. And you don't seem to hold that view. Work that out for me. What are your concerns, or are there concerns about your view with China and its economic engine that it was, and will it still be what it was?
Okay, so Andy, I was in China a month back, and I spent 3 weeks in China. I was in different cities. I looked at property companies. I was exploring what was happening in the property market in China. In one of the tier 2 cities that I went to, properties have fallen by 50%, property prices. So
Right.
there is a massive crisis in property prices in China. When you drive around China, virtually anywhere, you will see condominium buildings built like farms. You see 50 buildings here with probably space for 50,000 people, and then you see 100 buildings here with a space for about 75,000 building. So you can look around the horizon and you probably see residential spaces for I don't know, my eyes don't calculate that well, but anything 500,000 to 1,000,000 people. So they have overbuilt condominiums in China, and as a result, property prices are crashing. And what happened was that China has been growing consistently for the last 30 years. And their population was also growing. Population started stagnating from last year or early this year. So they were building properties, and most Chinese thought, as actually people do think elsewhere in the world as well, which is that property prices never go down. And when this becomes a social mindset, people just never think that property prices would ever fall. Right. A lot of Chinese, virtually every middle-class Chinese I know has bought 3, 4, 5 condominium apartments. Now, the problem is that everyone has bought 4 or 5 condominium apartments to flip to some another fool. The end result is that there are not enough fools available anymore. So clearly, Andy, visually you experience this traveling in China, that they have overbuilt condominium buildings. And a lot of those condominium buildings will eventually get demolished. Now, there's a concept called overheating in economics. When a country continues to grow for 10, 20, 30 years, they forget to account for several errors, because errors get accumulated over a period of time because there's enough growth to subsidize errors from building up. And that is what has clearly happened in the property market in China. And I've talked with a lot of young people. I went out for lunches and dinners with young people just to understand their mindset. And I met no young people who was not afraid about the job market in China. There's a fear that job market crisis is coming in China. Young people who are graduating from universities are afraid that they will have problems getting jobs. And if they get jobs, they might not get the kind of salaries they expect from their jobs. But again, Andy, remember that for the last 30 years, China has continued to improve, and people graduating from universities always got better than what they expected they would get. So right. Now, emotionally, they are not prepared for what is happening. There's a hump, there's a correction happening in China. But Andy, I tell you, I was in Changsha 3 years back, not very far from Wuhan. And I was, I like to go to smaller places and isolated places, and I like to sit around. And I was sitting at a place, and there was this old woman cleaning, an old city hall worker cleaning up the garden and a pot and, all the flowers that were hanging. And her heart and mind was in it. And I want to post it one of these days on my Twitter. But she spent about 10 minutes making sure the pot looked good. It was all clean and polished. She didn't have to do that, honestly. When you see things like that, you know that such a society has a great future, because there are people whose hearts and minds are in their work. So yes, China has short-term problems, and which the international media is exaggerating right now. But I see China as a great country. It has a wonderful future. Now, with all that said, I am no fan of Xi Jinping. I think Xi Jinping is over-centralizing the country. China actually historically over the last 30 years has had a very federal structure. Contrary to what the international media tells you, the federal government in Beijing has almost no control over cities. They don't dictate what the local administration does. So because of competition between regions all across China, China has grown so much. They have done so well. But Xi Jinping is certainly taking politically and socially China a few steps backwards. I still think that the higher order factors is this Chinese impulse to continue to improve, and Xi Jinping will get crushed if he continues to centralize China. So again, I don't want to be a mouthpiece of CCP if that's what people think I am. I dislike Xi Jinping, but I think China, I love Chinese society. I have met Chinese people, and I think that country has a wonderful future.
Got it. So you being like, from what you're saying, or it sounds to me like you would buy the dip, if you would, or buy the correction in China. What are your, I guess, what would be your top 2 to 3 countries, you say East Asia, your top 2 to 3 countries you advise your clients in doing business in? If I was, an entrepreneur with a lot of money that wanted to go run a company or relocate my company, where would you go?
Yeah, at this moment, I would advise people with a lot of liquid cash or investable money to very seriously look at the East Asian countries that I mentioned: Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Don't get caught up in this propaganda about Hong Kong and Taiwan that Washington bureaucrats are creating. They are creating unnecessary problem in East Asia, which should not be their business, and they are agitating China for no good reason. Taiwan and Hong Kong, China would let Taiwan and Hong Kong alone if Washington bureaucrats weren't agitating those China unnecessarily. Look at these countries. They are stable countries. Your money, if you find value, invest in these countries. But particularly look at China, because China has got beaten down extraordinarily badly over the last few years. Their stock market is down very badly. Their property market is down very badly. So it makes so in terms of market valuation and the inherent values of the companies that you see in China, there is a scope for an easy money to be made, in my view. Now, of course, there's always this thought about falling knife. Should I be investing when the knife might be falling? I don't think that way, Andy, because I don't know when the knife might stop falling. So when I see value, I invest. And do I lose 50% after that? I do. But that is my only only way I think I can invest. And then I expect my investments to do well. But
sounds very
look at all these countries.
Yeah, like it sounds very Warren Buffett-ish, if you would. So investing in value, where's the value at? So let me ask you this. It's like, or parlay this to the BRICS. There's a lot of, well, for lack of a better word, hype with the BRICS coming together. Many of these countries are East Asian countries, right? Is there a lot of, is this a reality to you? Meaning, is the BRICS, do you think, do they have a chance, or this idea of competing with the US and the US dollar? Yeah, what's your opinion on that? And I'm somewhat on the fence, just because of all the infrastructure that is dependent on the US dollar, all the liquidity that's dependent on the US dollar. Work that out for me. What do you see with the BRICS and maybe possibly a gold-based currency competing with the US dollar and the US influence, if you would?
So, Andy, you used the right word, hype. BRICS is a hype. There's only one country in BRICS, which is China. There's virtually nothing in BRICS.
Right.
Okay. Now, Chinese are not there to show off. This is not the character of East Asians to show off. So Chinese are just happy developing themselves and growing economically. They are not here to show off. So if they can hide behind the term BRICS and do exactly what they always wanted to do, they are perfectly happy to do it. They are, of course, angry with the United States, and they see a problem with how the Western, I would say, military-industrial complex is agitating Hong Kong and Taiwan. They see that as a problem, and they don't like this interference. Now, I prefer Hong Kong and Taiwan to be independent countries, personally. I think they have a legitimate claim to be independent countries. I'm on their side. But why are Western countries talking about independence of Taiwan now? Why did they not talk about it 30 or 40 years back when China was an extremely weak country? So this is just a wrong time. Taiwan is too strong now. But anyway, coming back to BRICS, Russia is not in a great shape right now. India is a collapsing, fragmented, civil strife-ridden hellhole. South Africa is continuing to implode, and all Western countries should look at South Africa, because that is what I see as the future of the Western world, because they have brought in too many ethnic conflicts. So look, that's South Africa. What is left? Brazil. Brazil is a stagnant economy. It's a second world economy. There's no hope of Brazil ever becoming a first world country. It will stay stagnant as Malaysia is. BRICS. Yeah, so that's BRICS. The only country is China. Now, Chinese yuan. So I have a bank account in China with a yuan bank account, and I have a Chinese yuan account outside China. Can I transfer my yuan from outside China to inside China, or inside China to outside China? No. Yuan is not a freely tradable currency, because Chinese government wants to restrict its people from taking out money from China. So yuan is a restricted currency. Being the only backbone of BRICS, what is the hope of yuan becoming an international currency in the short time? Moreover, I like China, but how much trust does the international money has on China? Not much.
Not much.
Not much. So China has, China is a new country. It's a country of the last 1 or 2 decades. So they have to establish credibility over, I would say, 50 to 100 or 150 years before the market starts accepting it as a safe place. Now, remember, in my view, Singapore and Hong Kong are much safer countries than Switzerland is. However, the world doesn't think that way. The big money of the world still prefers to go to Switzerland, because Switzerland has created a history. In my view, Singapore is by far the best run country with the most stability today, and it has maintained that for the last 30, 40, 50 years. However, it does not have a long enough history to sink in to the psyche of people that it's a safe place. And similar to for the same reason, yuan will take a long time to become an international currency, most importantly that China has to let go of its currency first. It has to make it a freely tradable currency. Now, that all said, the best days of the US dollar are over. The amount of US dollar countries kept in their reserves have been declining consistently over the last many years. And US is in this really bad shape right now. Inflation is rising, interest rate is rising, government has to pay more and more money in interest payments, and the more interest rates rise, the more the governments get squeezed, the more welfare they have to pay, the more money they have to print. So the US is in a really bad spot here right now. And that's all because of the welfare system. And we can go back to talk about fertility rates that we talked about earlier, which is that they are on a path to harakiri by destroying their economies and making themselves welfare economies. So US dollar's best days are over, but US is still by far the best country on the planet. I still love that country. I spend a lot of time in the US. And I think US dollar is here to stay for the last many decades, but the best days of the US dollar are over.
Fair enough. Then it begs the question is, when you're consulting with your clients, is where do you put your money? Where are you investing? It seems to me you still believe in the engine. And I would, and when I say you, I would agree with you. The engine of especially China, but Southeast Asia developing and continue to develop and continue to consume raw materials. Put your money in commodities, right? Physical stuff. What would you say about that?
Well, so I focus a lot of my time on investing in junior mining sector. That is just my specialization.
Right.
That I just happen to be in that industry. So I consider myself, I wouldn't say expert, but better able to make money in that sector. So I advise my clients primarily on that, but I also advise my clients on investing in China and Hong Kong. I think gold has, I continue to think that gold has a very good future. And the only reason I think gold has a good future is because there's a disconnect between an understanding about where the world is going and where I think the world is going. You know, countries like Canada and Australia are euphoric that they are bringing in 1 million people every year from outside their boundaries to improve their economies. My version of that is that, hey, I grew up in a hellhole and I know what it means to bring in all these people. You're creating a hellhole out of Canada. So, you know, this nice garden will turn into sewage basically within the next few years in Australia and Canada. So I have a difference of opinion from what money is thinking, money that is investing in the market is thinking. And that is why I think there's a chaos coming in the Western world because of all the unnecessary problems they are importing. So I like gold. Also because the third world is imploding, I like gold. I like gold also because East Asia continues to improve and they want to, you know, China property market is no longer going to be seen as a way to invest. Chinese are buying gold in a higher proportion. Yeah. So I think gold has a better future. And, you know, this Palestinian conflict can blow over any time and there will be a lot of fear of that. China will revert back to its growth rate over the next few years. It will face some humps, but also, Andy, remember that when they talk, you know, all the international media talks about China slowing down or China not doing well. China continues to grow. China is growing at 5% or more rate right now. And 5% rate on a $10,000 per capita economy translates into $500 per capita. That is a massive amount of growth for a second world nation. Just because the history was in the past was a higher growth in terms of percentage does not mean China has changed course. China continues to grow. And I think this obsession with growth is a problem. You know, you have to look at social harmony and social stability. And these countries have maintained social harmony and social stability. So again, growth will come as well.
Got it. Let's talk about the junior mining sector here. Is when you're constructing a portfolio, let's go micro. When you're constructing a portfolio, where do you start with in the junior mining sector? Give us some points when you're evaluating a company. So what do you look at? Do you look at the management team first? Do you look at where they're producing, where they're drilling? Yeah, what do you look at? The balance sheet? Where do you start with?
Yeah, so, you know, this is not, you know, you don't, there's no step-by-step process. Something comes in front of me and I say, hey, this is worth looking at.
Yeah.
I spent 10-15 minutes to do a quick evaluation of whether I think there is more value, inherent value than the market valuation of that company. And if,
okay, so you're
if
looking
that
at
is the
assets.
case,
You're looking at the assets.
I want to start assessing that way. And if it passes the first test, I have to be very careful in assessing the management of that company. Management is the key. If a company has a $50 million, so I was looking at a company which has $52 million in cash and nothing else. And someone came to me saying, should this company be valued at 50 million or more? And I said, maybe it should be valued at less than 50 million. Because the problem with most people, Andy, is that if you give them too much cash, they will destroy that cash. They will fritter that cash away. They will become too easy with cash. They will start living a lifestyle. And you shouldn't trust anyone, including me, with too much cash.
Right.
That's because that's the human tendency. You become too comfortable when you have access to too much cash. So I want to really spend time assessing subjectively the values of the management. I want to understand how they think. Are they rational? Are they moral? Are they streetwise? Because at the end of the day, they have to operate in an environment where there are these woke, corrupt people, woke freeloaders, bureaucrats who are freeloaders and who think they are gods, politicians who are catering to the lowest common denominator in any society. So you want a management who has a basket of competencies. And then I want to see a delta between value and market valuation. And if I'm satisfied with this, I just go for it. I don't look at the trends. I don't want to worry about too much. I will look at those things before I take my final decision. But that's my core of my work on these companies. Now, I haven't said a word about underpinning commodities here. Because I don't care. I don't care. If I really think a certain commodity should do well, I should actually invest in that commodity, not in these companies. These companies have nothing to do with underpinning commodities. You should completely avoid investing in junior mining sector or mining sector for the underpinning commodities. This is because most of investors invest in the mining sector because of the underpinning commodities. Mining sector is one of the worst sectors in the investment arena. Look at how the junior mining sector in Canada has performed over the last 20 years. It has fallen by 80% when the US stock market probably has gone up by 5 times, which means that $100 you invested in the venture exchange is probably worth about less than $20 today. And had you invested the same thing in the US market, you would have been at $500. So compare $20 to with $500. So this greed and lust driven investing in commodities using mining companies as vehicle is horrible for this sector and for its investors. So I don't even look at commodities when I'm investing in junior mining sector. Again, as I said, I am in this sector because I happen to be in that sector, not because I crave for a certain commodity.
Got it. So if you don't mind, would you mind dropping some names of some of the companies you're evaluating?
Well, again, Andy, one has to be very careful when investing in these companies because a lot of these companies go up and down quite rapidly. And a lot of and a lot of things go wrong, and you have to watch them sort of on a weekly basis. Or I'm not a day trader. I own these companies for a long time, but I still have to be very careful. Let's mention 2 or 3, 4 companies. One is a company called Aztec Minerals. The ticker is AZT. They have a project in Mexico. They have a project in the United States. Mexico has its problems with certain laws right now. But both the projects, I think, are capable of becoming mines in the medium-term future. So there's a clear pathway to them becoming mines. The company's market capitalization is less than $20 million. They have just finished raising cash. I'm probably among the largest shareholder of the retail, non-institutional shareholder, or probably the largest shareholder of the company. And I just gave them a lot of money as well. So Aztec Minerals, I think, trading at about 18 cents is a good buy in my view. Another company that I like quite a bit is a Japanese company, Irving Resources. The ticker is IRV, and it's trading at about 60 cents Canadian. It has a fabulous project in Kogoshima, in the Kyushu part of Japan. And I think, it can go to zero, but they have a working arrangement with Newmont. It can become a big project at some point of time. So you can go to zero, but your $50 million market cap can also go up to a few $100 million market cap. So, you have to pay the risk and reward there. Sure. There's a company called Aris Mining. It has projects in Colombia and Guyana. I think that there's a good valuation there. There's a company called O3 Mining trading at $1.45. I think it has a good. The downside is limited, and they could have a good upside. So let's say these four companies.
Got it. Thank you. Do you look at any other commodities like industrial metals, or do you look at the energy sector at all, or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I look at everything, Andy, and actually I have recently looked at a lot of coal companies, and you can coal companies, and you can pretty much randomly pick up any of the billion-dollar coal mining companies, big coal mining companies, and my guess is you will do well. So
why is that?
So okay, just let me name a few names very quickly. Warrior Coal, Peabody Coal in the US, Whitehaven Coal in Australia, Coronado Coal in Australia, Yancoal in Australia. But look for any of these billion-dollar coal companies in Australia and the US, and you will do all right. And I'll tell you why. And this is, there are some commodities where I have my special views, and that is why, commodities are commodities because they are fungible, and you shouldn't be speculating in the future of those commodities. But I still have views on 2 or 3 commodities, and one of them is coal. And the reason I'm interested in coal is that we have become virtue signaling people today as a society. We want to think that if we stop investing in buying coal stocks, we will reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Now, electricity that I'm using and you are using is, a large chunk of that is actually coming from coal. But because we don't see it, we think it doesn't exist. So fund managers across the board have sold their coal portfolios and are insisting that companies with coal mining should spin off their coal mining. As a result, coal mining companies have fallen drastically in market valuation. Yeah, very cheap. Now, remember, look at any of these companies, and you can very quickly go to their financials. The market capitalization, let's say, is $5 billion. They are making profit of $2.5 billion every year, and they have maybe $1.5 billion in cash in the treasury. Now, and they give me about 15 to 20% in dividend every year, yield every year.
Silly. That's crazy.
Now, that's crazy. So because of this skewedness, convoluted situation that big fund managers, big virtue signaling, empty suit fund managers have created, coal companies have become very cheap, and I'm very happy to invest in coal companies.
Okay. Where can our listeners get in touch with you or reach out to you to possibly invest or just listen to more of the content that you put out there?
So I write free musings in which I write about companies that my clients and I are investing in. It's on my website, jayantbhandari.com. I also have a Twitter account, Jayant Bhandari 5 is the handle.
Excellent. Okay, I'll put all of this in the show notes. So any final thoughts or any final words for us that you can give us?
Well, I think we have talked a lot about a lot of things, and I, as I said, I'm very keen on what's happening in East Asia, and you people should actually, everyone should go and visit China. China is a lovely place. There's the rule of law. I have never seen anything called social credit system in China, which has become such a myth in the international media. I have, I have not come across any evidence of the genocide, the so-called genocide happening in Xinjiang. So people should go and visit China and understand that China has a lot more positive things than negative things. It's not a perfect country, and the international media just does not portray it properly.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. And again, to all of our listeners and viewers, I'll put everything, all of your contact links into the show notes so people can get in touch with you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.